Today is May 22nd in the year 2009. I'm Karen Herman with the Archive of American Television. It is my great pleasure today to be interviewing John Langley here at the Television Academy headquarters in North Hollywood, California.
Well, thank you so much, John, for being with us today. And we're going to start with some background information, starting with your name at birth.
My name at birth was, and still is, John Russell Langley, Jr.
And when were you born?
I was born June 1st, 1943,
And where?
in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
Is that where you grew up?
No, actually, I grew up in West Los Angeles on Cotner Avenue, which was run over by the 405 freeway.
When did you move to Los Angeles?
I think I was about a year old. It was before any conscious memory. So most of my early childhood was spent in West Los Angeles, and then after that in Manhattan Beach, California.
And talk a little bit about your parents. Your mother's name?
My mother's name was Lily Lurleen Langley, née Fox, and my father was John Russell Langley Sr.
What did they do?
My father was sort of a roustabout. He was in the oil business as a wildcatter for a while, which is what my grandfather did. It was feast or famine kind of lifestyle. Then he was in the defense industry, for which reason they ultimately moved to California during the war, during the heyday of the defense industry.
And did your mother work?
No, she didn't work. She was a housewife her entire life.
Any brothers or sisters?
I have two brothers and a sister. Older brothers, younger sister.
Did any of them go into the industry too?
No, not not in the least. No, they weren't interested in entertainment or that arena.
Do you think you inherited any traits from your parents?
Oh God, I think indirectly we all inherit something from our parents, or directly or indirectly. I think from my mother I got a lot of determination. These are things you learn later in life. I used to think I was more like my father, but as it turns out I think I was far more like my mother. She was an ambitious person, very determined, stubborn, had all the traits that it takes to be in this particular business, meaning entertainment.
Now, what kind of things were you interested in growing up?
I was a reader. I was an early reader, and I've read all my life. So I was interested in everything from comics as a child before school to books, adventure books, history books, historical fiction, nonfiction, history, just all kinds. Anything I'd read, anything. Postage stamps, whatever was near me.
Did you watch TV as a kid?
Oh, avidly. And my childhood sort of corresponded with the advent of television in many ways, because I have early childhood memories of watching the old kinescope programs, with local Channel 5 news, I think, was on back in those days, KTLA broadcasting, whatever. There was a lot of wrestling, boxing. These were the sporting events of that time. The Lone Ranger, Howdy Doody, you name it, all these kinds of early television experiences I was there for and was an avid fan. A lot of westerns, that kind of thing.
Did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I had no idea. Didn't have a clue. I came from a family that wasn't highly educated. They were part of the Okie diaspora, all of the grapes of wrath, the things that Steinbeck wrote about. They kind of moved west with that movement from the Oklahoma Dust Bowl people to California, and then they would go back and forth. So I didn't come from an educated background. I came from a sort of a lower economic strata, feast or famine on the part of my grandfather. But my parents weren't. My mother was from a farm background, and my father was, kind of a roustabout guy. So I didn't have a paradigm for what you're going to do in life.
So you had absolutely no idea?
No, I had none.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to Aviation High School in Redondo Beach, which is adjacent to Manhattan Beach.
And when you graduated, what were your plans?
At the time, I wanted to see the world a little bit, so I joined the Army, because in those days you were drafted no matter what. And this was sort of in between wars. There was no war going on at that moment. So I said, I'll enlist, because my brother said enlisted in the service because you were going to get called sooner or later. The difference was if you enlisted, you could do whatever you wanted to do, pretty much, given the intellectual capability. You could pick and choose your particular pursuit within the Army or the Air Force or whatever it may be. So I had heard about Army intelligence and security, and I thought, well, that sounds good. I'll go into that. And I qualified, and so that's the path I chose, thinking it would be easier than sludging through jungles or anything as a foot soldier.
What kind of things did you do?
It started out as a thing called Army Security Agency. It's communications intelligence, and it morphed into Army Intelligence and Security, both of which reported to NSA, National Security Agency. And it's all that spy stuff, it's all communications intelligence. In those days, a lot of Morse code, teletype, phone intercepts, all of that kind of stuff. So,
do you have any good stories about that?
Well, yeah, back in the day, I mean, we knew that the Russians were sending up people that didn't make it back in their rocket ships and things like that. There was a lot of that kind of thing. I was in Panama during the Cuban crisis, so that was kind of interesting. Because, for example, we knew that they had shot down one of our U-2s before anybody heard about it, and we thought that was going to be war, and it was a little hairy at the time, because if you were in the middle of it and had knowledge of what was going on, it was a little scarier. Scary enough, I suppose, for everyone, but...
Do you think that your experience in the military informed what you ended up doing in your career?
No, my experience in the military taught me one thing and one thing only, that I wanted out of the military. I did not respond well to authority. I had some issues. I went in as a private, and I exited as a private. And I got what is called an early out, meaning I went back to college in order to get out of the service early. And in those days, they'd let you out up to 3 months early if you were accepted by a school and would plan to go to college. So again, I got out of the Army in 1964. That was right around the time that Vietnam was heating up. In fact, the first class before me, the class immediately before me in Army Intelligence and Security, had a fellow who was the first guy killed in Vietnam. And nobody had heard of Vietnam. Nobody knew anything about it. This was like 1962, early 62. So they almost sent me to Vietnam, but I didn't have enough time left. So you had to volunteer to extend your service, and I was hardly going to do that.
And you said you went off to college.
Yeah, I went back to school briefly, but I wasn't really ready to go to school yet. I was into chasing girls and all those kinds of things young men do, which was one of the reasons I joined the Army. It sounded very exotic and adventuresome, and go off to exotic places, which was, a nice recruiting device, but it's not quite the truth. But again, I had no idea what I wanted to do, so I wandered around and worked in the air freight business for a while, and got tired of all that and went back to school.
What'd you study?
I studied literature, English. I was an English major, got a degree in English, and then in Comp Lit, got a master's, and was teaching at the University of California while working on a doctorate in the philosophy of aesthetics or literary criticism or one of those kinds of
How
things.
did you get into that?
Well, if you go to school long enough and if you do well and if it's easy, you just say, or as I said to myself, this is easy. I think I'll just keep doing it. I enjoy reading. I enjoy the academic environment. It was great fun. It was extremely easy. I was facile. It was, it just seemed like the thing to do at the time. And I enjoyed teaching until I started teaching more than more than once the same class, which immediately told me as a ADD kind of guy that was not my profession, that I should move on, because I kind of saw it as, in terms of the myth of Sisyphus, pushing the rock up the hill and it rolls back down, and then you push the rock up the hill. And I couldn't conceive of doing that. It was too much of the same thing.
So what did you do?
After that, let me see. I got a job in the airline industry and with Northwest Airlines in public relations and management kind of stuff. Traveled all over the world. Sounded like a great job because you could travel for free. So it sounded interesting.
And how did you make your way into entertainment specifically?
Well, again, I had always been a writer of one sort or another, sort of an indifferent writer. But I mean, I wrote short stories, and I wrote for literary magazines in college, and I did all that kind of thing. So I had written a screenplay. I was not happy being in working for an airline. I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do ultimately. So I had written a screenplay, and a producer saw it and asked me if I wanted to come and be a co-author of a movie and an associate producer. And it sounded great, sure, that sounds good. So I quit the airline job, and I had 3 kids, so it was nice to continue employment. So I went and worked on this project with a producer named Jack Kaufman, a guy who used to do a lot of work for the Wolper organization. And we worked for a producer named Steve Friedman, who had done a lot of movies like Slapshot and this, that, and the other thing. And we worked on this movie, and then it fell apart in 3 months or 4 months.
What was it about?
It was called The Crowley Testament. It was an interesting project because it was a bit of Zelig. It was a theatrical documentary, a fictionalized version of the truth, posing as the truth. The mad scientist, in this case, an anthropologist named Dr. Lucius Crowley. And it was about his dying suddenly and news reports, and then they found his archive of film, and then you started watching the disintegration of this Nobel laureate who went mad. And he went mad because of witnessing and experiencing the rituals and rites of civilization and all the bizarre things that happen in society and that kind of thing.
So was it also going to be cinema verite?
No, it was going to be it was sort of going to be it was a theatrical documentary is how it was posing, but it was all fiction. But it was shot as fact, a reconstructed documentary. A little bit like the most similar thing to it would have been the Hellstrom Chronicles, which bizarrely and oddly enough won for documentary, and it's fiction. It's a go figure, right? It won an Academy Award or something.
Wasn't it a Wolper project too?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And Jack Kaufman, the fellow that hired me, was out of that organization, so he took inspiration from that, I guess. Or he kind of thought that would be an interesting idea, and he sold it to Steve Friedman. Steve Friedman sold it to Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers allowed us to go out and shoot a reel, but by the time we finished the reel, a different head of production took over, and he threw out everything before him. So our project happened to be one of those things he threw out.
What was your next move from there then?
Oh God, I worked for a company called Producers Creative Services for a while. A friend of mine said, come over here and do this with me. And I worked there for 2 or 3 years. That was marketing, motion picture marketing and advertising, writing press books and marketing manuals and junk like that. And making movie posters and shooting. I know one of the things we did there was sort of did the first video press kits that had ever been done. In fact, they came out of that company. And Universal, I think it was Conan the Barbarian was the first one. And of course, the fellow from Universal took credit for it because it came from a subcontracted agency. So, but we did a bunch of those kinds of things.
Were you involved in the actual filming of these?
Later on, yeah, I did a lot of them. I did all kinds of them. Back to School, Born in East LA, a bunch of stuff like that, tons of them.
Is this where you met Martin Barber too?
Malcolm Barber I met at Producers Creative Services. He's a guy I'd known since 1974 or 5, around there.
Is that when you decided to go into business together?
Yeah, after Producers Creative Services, we decided to start a production company, which subsequently became Barber Langley Productions, and we were going to do a film. But the film fell apart because the guy that was funding it said, do something small first, show me what you can do. So we did a documentary called Cocaine Blues. And out of that came, that was pretty much the launch, first thing I'd done in terms of production. And we wrote, produced, and directed it. So kind of, got us going.
What was it about?
It was an analysis, a meditation on, an investigation of the cocaine phenomenon in America, because I knew of many people who had experienced that phenomenon, including myself, and it seemed like an apt topic because it was very au courant in Hollywood. So we said that'd be an interesting subject. So that's what we did.
And what was your learning process like to do that?
Well, it was a bit of a self-taught process because I had no background whatsoever in film or film production or any of that. But I had a strong literary background in terms of an academic grounding in literature and plays and poetry and storytelling, that kind of thing. So it's just applying the same skills to a different medium, that's all. I mean, I knew we had to tell a good story, had to engage an audience, had to inform them and do all the kinds of things that you need to do with a documentary and find an interesting topic. So it seemed like the ravages of the cocaine phenomenon was a good topic. And that's why we did it, basically.
How did you sell it?
Well, that was an instant learning curve. I thought you made a documentary and you just kind of sold it and everybody bought it. Well, obviously that's not the case. No one bought it at first. It was very difficult. We had Pyramid Films was an educational distributor. They took it on. And it ultimately made all of its negative costs back, which we paid back to the investor, which is unheard of, and even got some profit out of it. And we aired it on television in Miami and Sacramento, I think, San Francisco, 4 or 5 markets, but we never got widespread distribution. But we won some awards, Cine Golden Eagles and Houston Film Festivals and things like that. So that kind of got us recognition for doing other projects. I mean, it gave us a little cred, as they say.
So what did that lead to?
Oh, God. That led to, we did a charity gig for the White House with a bunch of people. Tim, God, what's his last name? Tim Reed, who was a fellow that was interested in promoting this and had ties to the Reagan White House somehow. And he came to us and asked me if I would direct it. And I said, sure, why not? So then I brought Malcolm in on it to help produce it and did this bizarre anti-drug documentary called Stop the Madness. But it had this bizarre cast. They kept throwing celebrities in. You have to put this person in. Like Whitney Houston was a singer, obviously. She was like 19 years old at the time. Patti LaBelle, The New Edition. All of these people were singing the song, but then we had to throw in Arnold Schwarzenegger, David Hasselhoff, just a bizarre congeries of celebrities of the time, to help populate it with people that would make it more interesting, I suppose. And then we concluded by filming in the White House, in the Blue Room, with Nancy Reagan singing "Stop the Madness" with with this choral arrangement of kids. It's very bizarre. Left my tie in a potted plant. So.
How was it filming in the White House? Did you have a lot of security issues?
It was extraordinarily bizarre because I took off my tie, getting the shots all set up in the Blue Room, and there were people hovering around, like the White House historian and the curator of this, the curator of that. And I said, move this, I had to, my grips and things, move a plant so we could block off a window and make the light softer. And it freaked him out. A guy ran up to me and he said, you can't do that, you can't do that. And I said, can't do what? He says, you can't move that plant. That hasn't been moved for, 100 years or whatever it was. And I said, well, listen, you have a choice. Do you want the plant to look good or do you want Mrs. Reagan to look good? And he chose to go with the latter because she inspired terror in everyone on her staff. They were so frightened of the fact that she was soon to appear. And they kept saying, "You're the director. You're the director." When the first lady comes in, you have to take her. I said, "Calmate, chill, cool it. It's all going to be okay." And I left my tie in the potted plant and never got it back. And she came in and we did our thing and we left. It was interesting but bizarre.
How did she take to you as a director?
She was very polite and gracious, actually. I mean, I have to give her credit. She was very professional. She walked in. I introduced myself, and I said, and we're here to do this, and you do this and do that. And she said, okay, and introduced herself to the other people. And we shot a couple takes, and she was done. So it was a relatively painless and interesting experience.
And where did that air?
Oh God, they had some big event in Los Angeles in which the First Lady and a bunch of celebrities showed up. It was for the Entertainment Industries Council, I think. And they showed it there, and then I don't know whatever happened to it. I mean, it was for charity. What could I say?
What were some of your other projects around that time? Is that
Well, let me see. After that, it did. Well, there was a desperate scramble to do anything, to stay alive, to keep busy, to feed my family. So I did some movies as a publicist. I did. I did a film right before that as second unit director of a film called Volunteers with Tom Hanks and John Candy and a bunch of people like that. And we all became pals and had a lot of fun down in Mexico for a few months. And then I did a bunch of those behind-the-scene things for various and sundry TriStars and people like that. And then what else did I do? And then I started doing, I tried to sell Cops, the concept for Cops, which sort of came out of Cocaine Blues, and nobody was interested at the time. They said it'll be a nightmare. You can't have a show with no narrator, no host, no script, they couldn't conceive of it. So I kept pushing it and dragging my partner to meetings and all that. And he didn't believe in it. He thought it was a crazy idea. Until I met up with Tribune Entertainment, and they said, listen, we're not going to do that. It's fascinating, but why don't we put you together with Geraldo Rivera, and you guys, he wants to do shows in the crime arena, and this sounds right up his alley. So obviously with Geraldo Rivera, it wasn't going to be Cops because it's hosted. But we needed the gig, and we met with them and said, yeah, sure, we'll do a program with you. So we did a show called American Vice about, the subtitle was The Doping of the Nation. It was all about the, again, cocaine phenomenon and the drug phenomenon in America. This is back in the mid-'80s. And we orchestrated and arranged 3 live drug busts, which I'm sure will never happen again.
what do you mean by orchestrate?
Well, we arranged it. Here's what happened. We had a meeting, and the guy at Tribune said, so what can you do that's different? And I said, oh, we'll do a live drug bust. Just yanked it out of the air, right? He said, you can do that? I said, oh, sure. We met with Geraldo. He asked the same question because he'd heard about it. He said, you can do a live drug bust? I said, yeah, we'll arrange it. We'll find a place in the department. We'll do it. So everybody got very excited, thinking of the television potential of this. It's something you can stunt, you can advertise, you can promote that, right? So we then had to scramble to figure out how to do it, much less arrange it. And the challenge was to find a department that would go along with this. So we went to Broward County and met with a guy named Nick Navarro, who was the sheriff. He agreed to it, and he agreed to it because we were filming along with him before the live drug bust, and then we threw it out to him. And we did one in Florida, one in, I think it was Houston, and one in San Jose. The one in Florida was extremely successful. They found 2 kilos of cocaine in the suspect's house, and it was all on live television, and it was an extraordinary experience. I mean, it was something that I don't think will ever be done again.
Was there a chance that there wouldn't be drugs at the location?
Of course. There weren't in Houston, the drug bust there. They didn't find any drugs. And I don't think they found them in San Jose either. They may have found a little pot or something. But I was on the successful one, of course. But it was just a matter of, luck, pot luck. I mean, they had a warrant to search the house. They suspected it highly. They had undercover officers working the case, and we talked them into accompanying them when they did their bust. In fact, I said, well, listen, you're going to do this bust anyway. How about, can you do it like on this date? And they said, well, yeah, that's right around when we're going to do it anyway. And I said, well, then could you maybe do it, in this 2-hour window? And they said, yeah, sure. So that's how we did it.
Were there any legal problems in terms of, you're doing something live like that?
No, au contraire, the news departments don't have any legal issues with showing anything that is news or newsworthy. And this was aired and re-aired once, I think. So it's not like doing Cops, in which I have releases on everybody for everything. it fell under the news, so we didn't have any of those issues.
How was it working with Geraldo Rivera?
I give Geraldo a lot of credit. He's very dedicated to what he does. He was always very good to me. I did 6 or 7 shows with Geraldo, 6 or 7 programs, some of which were much better than the others, but this is a very good program, the American Vice. It was interesting, revealing, informative, exciting, all the things you want in television. It had excitement, but it had information. We did some others like on Runaway Kids, called Innocence Lost. It was an excellent show about the runaway problem and issues in America. We did one on murder, did one on the mafia. I mean, it was a very interesting, it's sort of where I cut my teeth in the crime arena and learning more and more about crime and law and order and the justice system. And they were extremely interesting shows. And in terms of Geraldo, he was always there, did his job. He gets criticisms for being over the top, and he is over the top sometimes, but he's Geraldo. What can you say? But he was great to work with.
Was this after the Al Capone vault?
Yeah, we did the second show after the Al Capone vault. Now, the Al Capone vault was the highest rated syndicated special in history, period. We did American Vice right after that, and I gave him the line. I said, listen, you can tell him this time there's something in the vault. Because obviously, when we did the drug bust and there was 2 kilos of cocaine that they seized, it made for a good line, sort of a comeback line. Because he was very embarrassed by the Capone's vault issue. And he wanted to, reclaim his cred.
And you had mentioned this kind of started your credibility in terms of
well, yeah,
police
having
work.
done those shows, all of these shows, bear in mind, were some of the highest rated shows in television history for syndicated programming. I mean, they were like in the top 10. I think every one of them was in the top 10 in their initial airings. American Vice did very well. The Murder Show did very well. We did another one that I'm not proud of on Devil Worship, which was NBC's highest rated show in history.
Why aren't you proud of it?
I didn't like the subject matter. I didn't want to do the show. I did it for economic, not creative reasons. It was just not a topic that was near and dear to me. I thought it was filled with wackos and crazy people, and it was just not my favorite show. I mean, we all, at one time or another, if you work long enough and do enough, you're going to have some things you're not that proud of. That's one of them. I mean, it was an all-time rating documentary. It's the highest rated documentary in network television history. But I would happily not have done it if I could have. This is one of those things. I'm very proud of the other shows. I mean, The Innocence Lost and American Vice, those are excellent shows. I mean, they're informative and entertaining.
You also did one called Terrorism Target USA.
Yeah, that was without Geraldo. That was with Jack Anderson. Did one called Terrorism Target USA, which was an interesting show because it presaged and it predicted and it forewarned about the terrorism problem that was coming to the United States. And this is back in '88 or '89. Which obviously was years before it actually happened. But every expert on the planet knew that America was going to be attacked by terrorists sooner or later on our soil. So it wasn't that shocking to me that, I mean, it was shocking that 9/11 happened, but the fact of a terrorist attack was not shocking.
How did the idea come to you to do that in 1989, to focus on this?
Well, I did that for a fellow named Chaim Saban, who's an Israeli who was interested in the topic anyway. So Jack Anderson had approached him, and there's an amusing story because he turned to me, and I had the meeting with him and Jack Anderson laid out his theories and all that. And this was on the first show we did, which was a show called Who Murdered JFK? And he laid out his theory, meaning Jack Anderson. And he left, and Chaim turned to me and said, so what do you think? Do we have a show? And I said, no. And he said, well, what are we going to do? And I said, well, we'll make one, And then we got into the topic, and we promulgated and demonstrated Jack Anderson's theory, which I didn't personally believe in.
What was his theory?
His theory is that the mafia, in conjunction with Castro, killed Kennedy. And it's not, I tend to believe in Gerald Posner's book that he wrote about the subject called Case Closed. And that is to say that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. He's a nut who shot the president, and it's tough to take and it's difficult to understand. But all the conspiracy theories surrounding it are, generally speaking, misreporting or bunk. And I used to be a conspiracist before I did this show. But once you do the show and you delve into it and you start interviewing the witnesses and you start digging through the facts and you find out how much mythicating there's been about it and how much misreporting, you discover this nonsense. I mean, yeah, he had all the motive in the world. He was a nut. He was he had his axe to grind. He was looking for fame and some, deed that would, make him immortal. It all falls into place when you investigate it. Most people don't investigate these things.
So that's interesting then, but the documentary itself was still talking about the mafia and...
Yes, the documentary was Jack Anderson's theory. My job as the producer was not to promulgate my theory, but rather to demonstrate his theory. So we did that. I didn't agree with it, but we followed his theory and talked to all the people that he wanted to, support, that he had cited in support of his theory. I don't think it was a convincing argument or case, frankly, but we did it because, it was a little bit, I think all shows have a little fiction in them, even if they're documentaries. And I think that one had a lot of fiction in it. Not by Jack Anderson, just by what I think of as a tenuous theory at best. Because Jack Anderson was a lovely fellow, nice Mormon gentleman. And one of the most interesting meetings I've ever had in my life was Jack Anderson and E. Howard Hunt. Because E. Howard Hunt we brought in for this documentary, and Jack Anderson interviewed him. And we went and took him to lunch before the interview, and they had a little confrontation because the CIA apparently tried to poison Jack Anderson. This is factual. And they put some kind of poison on the steering wheel, and he was attacking E. Howard Hunt for his organizations having tried to kill him. Him meaning Anderson. E. Howard Hunt, blustered and raised his chin and took high offense at the notion that if they'd wanted to kill him, he said, we would have killed you. So.
And then he still went out and did the interview?
Oh yeah, then we went back to the production offices and did the interview.
Oh,
but they had a lively little exchange. It was extremely amusing and interesting historically.
Going back to the Terrorism Target USA, you mentioned Haim Saban and how that all came about.
Right. That was just to investigate the issue of terrorism, and Jack Anderson was the host. It wasn't his theory. He was just hosting the program. So we went and we interviewed all the usual suspects and pursued the topic of terrorism. We went to Israel and talked to Yitzhak Rabin and Shamir and Benjamin Netanyahu and all these Israeli politicians and all the terrorist experts, including the guys that had raided, Entebbe and who had shot up terrorists, like guys like Mookie Betzer, a very famous commando in Israel. And we talked to everybody in the world about this topic. And it became clear in so doing that we had been very naive, we, the Americans, in thinking there wouldn't be some attack on us sooner or later. And I'm sorry to say there was, obviously.
Did you watch that documentary at all after 9/11?
No, because this predated 9/11 by, 12 or 13 years, something. This was in 1988 or 89, so, I haven't seen that documentary in years, to be honest with you. I don't think I've seen it since I did it.
Well, while we're on the topic of terrorism, how did 9/11 affect you?
Well, I thought it was a shocking event, as all Americans thought. But again, I say it wasn't an unpredictable event. And personally, I was a little angry with our own government because I feel that the government let us down. Because again, if I, a private citizen, am out doing documentaries predicting that this is going to happen 12 or 13 years before the event, I would like to think my government's a little more on top of things. Clearly, they weren't. But again, that just shows the dysfunctionality of government as a phenomenon. You know, I'm not a big believer in government as a impervious, reliable, moral construct. I don't see government quite that way. It's a failed and fallible and sometimes failing institution. It's really no better than the people that are in it. So that's kind of how I saw 9/11. I thought that we way overreacted and instituted all kinds of laws that we didn't need to deal with the topic. Because again, it's a knee-jerk reaction to a horrific event. So that's kind of my perception of it, but that goes off into politics.
Did any of your productions focus on 9/11? Did you do anything special?
No, I never did any 9/11 programming because I felt that the topic was being done ad nauseum, frankly. I just, I concentrate on criminal arenas more than anything else, and I do that because they're high drama, they're, life and death, law and order, good and evil, that kind of thing, justice and injustice. So those arenas interest me a lot, which is not to say that they don't exist in the 9/11 arena. Sure they do, but it's a different topic. And there became a great deal of victimology after 9/11. Americans started looking at themselves as victims. And the rest of the world says, welcome to the club, which is I'm not dissing Americans. I am an American, and I'm very proud of it. But I'm just saying we were very naive, I think, in many respects about what really takes place in the world.
Well, let's move on to cops. You mentioned that you pitched it earlier, but talk about your basic feeling about when you thought about the idea. How did that idea come to you?
Well, the idea came to me back in the cocaine blues days when I was researching and running around and witnessing, drug raids and that kind of thing. And I thought it would be a fascinating topic. And it just, I don't know, ideas just come to you, And I said, this would really be great to follow police officers in their footsteps as a ride-along, a genuine ride-along with no interference between you and the subject. In other words, no narration, no narrator, no host, no script, no reenactment, none of that. Just keep it as pure as possible so you can experience the process. And that's kind of what intrigued me, and finally got it done over a process of over an agonizing process of years of trying to sell it to people because they were all very negative. I thought it was a very simple idea that was easily graspable, but you'd be shocked at how many objections people posed to the notion. And they were mostly legal objections or practical objections. Well, how is it going to be dramatic? And I said, the job is inherently dramatic. All we have to do is compress time and you're going to see it. And I want you to experience the process. I want you to walk in the shoes of the cops. I want you to feel the uncertainty of what's going to happen when a door opens and there's a man with a gun. All of these kinds of things. But again, no one was buying it.
Did you make a test film?
No. What had happened is because of doing all these Geraldo shows, I took a lot of the most exciting stuff, put it together in a reel, and showed that to Fox, to a fellow named Steve Chow. And he got it because he was, hopping up and down in his chair with excitement, about to wet his pants because he thought, God, this is really kind of cool. This is unusual. This is extraordinary. And he became our champion at Fox. And he was the first champion we had because everybody else just rejected it. They couldn't see it, for multiple reasons.
Who else had you gone to?
ABC, NBC, CBS. We went to everybody. Fox was the last court. It was the last place we went. And we went there because it was there, and it was a fledgling network, and most of their programming was failing. They were doing all kinds of series that were unsuccessful, so it seemed like a good place to go.
And talk about how they eventually bought it. What was the process that you went through?
Well, we had to jump through hoops, and this is a true story. At the time, because my mind was so into this reality programming, I fervently wanted to do cops. My partner and I at the time, Malcolm, started thinking of other show ideas and came up with a show we call 911. We had cops, of course, which was I came up with long before. But in the process of coming up with other shows, we came up with 911, which is what we called it. Another one was home videos, funny home videos. And the other one was, what was the other one? Well, there were those three. And we pitched them to various people, and nobody bought them. We pitched them to Chow. And he says, when it came, and then the other was America's Most Wanted, but we didn't call it America's, we called it Most Wanted. And Steve Chow says, we're doing that one, no. How about 911, about emergency calls and blah, blah. Nah, somebody will do it, I don't want to do it. How about, we went through the whole process. How about funny home videos? Look, the thousands of videos, it would make a great show. Nah, somebody will do it, I don't want to do it. Well, how about cops? I'm thinking about it. So finally, he called me back one day, and if you know Steve Chow, you'll know that this is the only way to deal with him. And he said, listen, I want you to come in for one more meeting, and we'll go over all this again. And I said, Steve, you wouldn't know a good show if it slapped you in the face. I'm tired of your crap. Just leave me alone. I'm not going to go, for another jerk-off meeting with you. And he got very excited because he was being rejected. No, come on. Just one last time, come in and just pick one of those shows. Which one do you really want to do the most? Just take one of them. And I said, okay, Cops, that's the one I want to do the most. He said, okay, come in, and I'll take you to Barry Diller. So sure enough, he arranged a meeting, we went in and pitched it to Barry Diller. And Diller's an extremely interesting executive. He's very intuitive and intelligent about television and film, and he's also an interesting character in the sense that you have to really believe in what you're selling him or he is not going to buy it. So he kept saying, okay, I get your idea, but you've got to have a narrator. And I said, no. Well, what do you mean no? And I said, that defies the whole purpose of doing it the way I'm talking about doing it, because you're adding a layer between you and the experience. All right, then. Well, you got to do some reenactments. And I said, no. He said, what do you mean no? And I kept doing this with them on each point because my feeling was to hell with it. If we get shut down, we get shut down, but I'm not going to sell out my idea anymore. To hell with them all. They're either going to do this or I'm not going to do it. And at the end of the meeting, he said, okay, let's do a pilot. I said, great. So we got up and we left, and I couldn't believe somebody actually bought it after all these rejections. And then we went out and did the pilot, and that's kind of how we got the show on. There were sequels to that, but...
Is it true that Rupert Murdoch was in on that?
Well, here's what happened. No. When we went out and we did the pilot, right, and I freaked out all of the cameramen because I told them to throw away their tripods. I said, no, there will be no tripods on this show, period. It's going to be 100% handheld, period. And God, I think we shot it in 3/4. I can't even remember. It's been so long. I've done so damn many shows now. But it was all, very archaic technology in the day. So finally, we finished the pilot. We go back, and I left in really rough stuff on the pilot. I mean, I left blood and guts, and it was really raw and powerful, but too raw and too powerful, But I did it intentionally because I wanted something that could be thrown out, because you've got to go for it and let them cut back. Well, we take it and we show the pilot to Barry Diller in his office, and there was Steve Chow, Barry Diller, a guy named Bob Creek, and they were the only people there initially. So we show the pilot, Diller watches it, and at the end of it he goes, God, and he says, that was powerful, and he says, too powerful. I mean, don't misunderstand, you guys did a great job, but it's amazing. And Bob Creek, the guy that represented the station, said, how in the hell can we sell that? And he says, just shut up. It's that's not the issue right now. He says, but Barry, there's no way we can sell the damn thing. And Steve Chow was just sitting there, kicking his leg up and down because he was, realized that Diller was going to make the decision. And then this guy came in the room, sat in the corner, and I thought, oh, it's an accountant or something. He looked like an accountant. He sat over in a corner in Diller's office and had a little pad, and he's sitting there, and he's listening to this arguing back and forth. And Diller would ask a few questions. How did you get that footage, and how did this happen, and so forth and so on, right? And he said, I don't know. And Creek would say, you can't order this. How the hell are you going to sell it? Diller said, shut up. That's not the point. And then the guy in the corner says, order 4 of them. Try 4. And I look over, and he goes, and Diller says, just hush. I'm talking right now. And he's blah, blah, blah. And the guy says, And I thought, well, who's that guy, the accountant? Well, obviously, it turned out that he wasn't the accountant. It was Rupert Murdoch. But nobody knew who Rupert Murdoch was or what he looked like, so I had no idea. And then I was called away out of the meeting on a medical emergency, so I heard all the rest afterward from Steve.
I guess I'll ask the Barry Diller question. How did you get that footage for that pilot?
Oh, we went out and we shot it. I mean, we spent. Here's what freaked Diller out or impressed him or dazed and dazzled him. We showed stuff you just didn't normally see. I mean, we showed there was a gay homicide, for example, and it was horrific. I mean, what had happened in the policeman's descriptions of it, and we showed all the blood on the wall. We didn't, get too graphic, but you got to remember that graphic is in your mind and your imagination too. The power of a context in a situation, when it is real, there's no faking it. You know it's real, and you smell it and taste it, and you start feeling, oh my God, and it just it envelops you in its reality. Now, because we followed everything as a process and what they really did, and we didn't jump ahead of them and do a lot of cutting, you knew it was real. They walked into the room, you knew they were walking in the real room. These are real homicide detectives. They're talking about the case as it's in front of them, as it's being revealed before their eyes, and as a consequence, you are experiencing the same things. The difference is you are not a homicide detective. You haven't seen this before. They've seen hundreds of murders and horrific scenes. You, the viewer, have not seen that, so it's a different impact. It's a different reality. It's a different truth for you. So that's what I think he and everybody that saw the pilot was reacting to. They just hadn't seen this stuff before. They hadn't seen the adrenaline pumping, shock value of reality when it's unvarnished and unrehearsed and unedited. It's just not what you experience on a normal basis in a normal life as an average good guy or girl citizen.
Now, were you there for those
Oh, yeah.
initial filmings?
Yeah, I mean, I was there for as much of the production as I could humanly be there for. I'll give you an example. I took Steve Chow out to, and this was in the pilot, to an airport because they were doing surveillance of drug couriers back and forth. So we're standing there, and the detachment of the undercover cops are pulling people over and asking them questions and so forth. So they had a tip, which is what often happens, that there was a drug courier coming through. So we're standing literally at a little food court watching them stop the suspect. Now they start asking questions. It was Vicky Cutcliffe, one of the sergeants, and her people are sort of surrounding this guy, a big kid, a big athletic weightlifter type kid. And they started asking him questions. Steve is with me, and he goes, "Why are you wasting my time? That guy's innocent. Why are they bothering him?" And I said, "I'll bet you $100 he's carrying drugs." "Nah, no way." Because Steve is an innocent young Harvard lad who was raised by an academic mom and dad. He has no idea what's going on in the real world. So sure enough, they start talking further and further, and they start to look in his bag, and he starts fighting with them. So all of these cops jump on him, and they're wrestling right there in the airport and tussling, and they fall to the ground, and they subdue him. And Steve's mouth dropped, 2 feet, and his eyes popped out like, watermelons. He says, "Damn, I had no idea that he had drugs." So it's that kind of thing was very unusual for network television. Nobody had seen these kinds of things unfold in front of their eyes. So obviously Steve thereafter was a total believer and an advocate for the show and a supporter and a champion and so forth and so on.
What kind of direction did you give your crews?
Keep the cameras rolling. Don't ever cut off the camera. You just keep shooting, keep shooting, keep shooting. But then there were stylistic issues. I mean, I say, focus on whoever's talking, pan to whoever isn't, widen out if it's a 2-shot, follow the action, never get ahead of the action. Follow the action. You can walk with somebody beside you. The minute you run down the street and watch them coming toward you, that's a film convention. It's a different reality. It's not video verite anymore. You're not discovering anything there. You're presupposing it. You're turning a subjective universe into an objective universe. You're turning a process into a cut. I don't want cuts. I mean, the ideal with cops is never cut anything, but you can't practically do that. If you do that, you're going to be Frederick Wiseman doing a lengthy meditation on a particular topic. And on that note, I got to give Frederick Wiseman credit. I had no awareness or knowledge of a guy named Frederick Wiseman when I did Cops. None. So I thought, I patted myself on the back. I thought it was hot stuff, coming up with this idea and this style and all of that, and people really responding to it. And then I went to a store about a year after the show was on, a video store, and I saw a thing that said Law and Order in the documentary section. So I said, oh, I'll get that. And it's Frederick Wiseman, never heard of the guy. Because again, I didn't have a background, an academic background in this. So I went, popped in the VHS, and watched Law and Order, which was made in 1967, about the Kansas City Police Department by Frederick Wiseman, pure cinema verite, and went, damn, the guy beat me by 20 years, you know. So, you know, again, if you read Ecclesiastes, you know there's nothing new under the sun. But I guess my achievement was putting it in a form that worked for network television.
Now talk about the format of the show. How was it structured?
Well, you know, if you watch it, you just think, oh, it's these cops out doing these different things, going on calls. What we tried to do, what I tried to do, what I mandated from the get-go, was that you have an action piece, a lyric piece, and a think piece. Now that means there are 3 segments in a cop show, right? So you want to hook an audience with an action piece. You want to stimulate their awareness, their interest. You want to grab their attention. And that's usually a car chase or a foot chase or something of that nature, something active. And then the second act, you know, he goes to commercial and come up for the second act. You want to slow it down a little, give people a chance to breathe. Just saw this exciting chase. So usually that's something lyrical, dealing with emotions and feelings. And it's usually like a domestic or something of that nature, you know. They're breaking up fights between husbands and wives or whatever. And then after that, you want to ratchet it back up, you know, but you also want to shift gears to what I call a think piece. You want something that's going to stimulate thought, or make people think about what they've seen. You want to leave them with something that makes them maybe meditate. So usually it's about the law or the nature of the law or an inherent injustice in somebody getting arrested for this particular thing, something like that. I mean, I may have I'll give you an example. There was a Rasta guy that argued with a cop about, why are you arresting me for smoking ganja, when that is part of my belief. So that's a nice act 3, you know what I mean? Because it deals with thinking and emotion. I mean, it leaves you thinking about our laws, you know, because police officers are there to enforce the law. They don't make the law, or at least they shouldn't make the law. So again, a lot of police officers don't believe that pot should be illegal, but they can't make that decision. They're there to enforce the law. Pot is illegal. So if somebody breaks the law, they arrest them, take them to jail. I mean, but as a citizen, when you watch something like Cops, hopefully you'll question what goes on in your own society. Why does all the crime take place in disenfranchised areas? Duh. It's like, why did the crime take place in Irish ghettos in the 19th century? Duh. It's because disenfranchised areas breed crime. There's less opportunity, less education, less money. There's 1,000 reasons for it, right? So in the early 20th century, why did the crime take place in Italian ghettos? Duh. I mean, it goes on and on. So if you see it now and it's a black ghetto or a Hispanic ghetto, hopefully the audience considers the sociological and psychological and legal impact of what that really means and what's going on in their society. We don't preach it, and we don't say, hey, you know, have a little caption up that says, you ought to think about the law here. But if you watch the show and it's honest and it's just showing you what happens and what the effects and impact of all these things are, hopefully you glean some information and some knowledge and maybe awareness about what's happening. So, I mean, those are all my hopes and dreams and ambitions. I don't know that it always succeeds, but that's the hope.
Did you have that format from the grain of the idea? Was that in the first?
Yeah, here's what happened. You know, you never know that you're an expert on anything until you're an expert on it. And I didn't realize that I'm the expert on Cops. I mean, I guess I can honestly say if there's anybody in this world that is the expert on the television show Cops, it's got to be me, right? So, you don't think that way. And so when people started asking me these questions about how do you structure a show? And I didn't think about it. I just did it. And then I started thinking about it, and I says, well, how do I structure the show? So I had to answer my own question. And I said, well, I always put an action piece. And I always, I started articulating what I do in fact and why I do it. And, then I developed the aesthetic, the verbal aesthetic after the instinctive aesthetic. I mean, I just did it because that's the way I knew the show had to be done. But I didn't think about it rationally. I didn't parse it. I didn't, decline that. I just figured it out afterward. I mean, and but it's true. It's what I've always done, and the reason I do it. I just hadn't thought about it consciously.
And what about the themes themselves within the episodes?
What about them in what regard?
In terms of the different types of situations encountered. A lot of times they're kind of variations on.
Oh, sure.
themes.
I mean, you mean if it's an action theme? Well, look, action is action. You want foot chases, car chases, fights, anything that's active, right? It doesn't have to be a chase or a fight, but it's got to be active. And if it's not active physically, it's got to be active mentally, meaning it's got to be a raging argument or something, and breaking up argument. It's got to be something that has voltage, right? And the domestic could be anything. I mean, the second act, the lyric act, anything with feelings, can be anything from a cop getting stuck with a needle when he's searching a suspect, and the suspect has AIDS, and he knows he has AIDS, and he's reaching in his pocket and gets pricked by a needle, and that happened in one of the episodes. Well, that's, it's an emotional thing for the cop, and he's sitting there squeezing blood out going, oh God, maybe I just got AIDS from being pricked by a needle, and that has happened. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing, and the third acts, again, can be the thought pieces, anything that makes you think. That can be a crime that shouldn't be a crime, maybe, or the behavior of a police officer enforcing a law that you don't agree with, or something in which there's a victim and you realize that they're only a victim because of this situation in society. It can be any of those variations on that. But I mean, generally speaking, categorically, I do it, with action, feeling, thought, or at least that's the attempt.
Well, talk then about the production process. How much is shot as opposed to how much appears in the shows?
We used to shoot, I don't know, 150 to 1 or something. We just shot, and kept the cameras rolling forever. Over the years, we've probably gotten better at it, and they shoot a little bit less, but it's still, I would say, 80 to 1 or something. I mean, you got to shoot, well, let me think about that. Let me see. Roughly speaking, we get a segment a week from each crew. A segment, meaning, there are 3 segments to a show. But that's not always true. It could be 2 weeks, right? So they may shoot 50 tapes to get that, So 50 tapes, and you're using one of those tapes, so it's 50 to 1 at least. Somewhere in that neighborhood. Or you can get lucky and shoot 10 tapes that week and get a segment. But it's a high ratio. It's certainly, 30, 40, 50 to 1, something like that. It used to be 100 to 1, 100 tapes to get 1 tape.
How many crews?
Right now, I've shifted the approach over the years. I have about 12 out right now because I'm trying to shoot during the best months. The best months for cops are summer months or fair weather months. And it only stands to reason, if you think about it for a moment, nobody is committing street crime in the dead of winter in the East Coast, for example. It's snowing, it's sloshy, it's sludge, it's not conducive to crime. Whereas summer months bring out everybody, it brings out the best and the worst of society. Someone once asked me, why does everybody not have a shirt on cops? Well, apart from socioeconomic reasons, we shoot in warmer climates, warmer areas, and so it's usually summertime, so people take off shirts more. But I mean, that's one explanation that is true, and I'm sure there are multiple reasons.
Okay, let's stop here to change.